The telegram arrived at the Double V Ranch on a scorching Tuesday afternoon in July 1882, bearing news that would change everything. The mail-order bride from Boston would arrive in Douglas, Wyoming Territory, on the Friday train. Harrison Vance read those words 3 times while standing in the dusty yard, his weathered hands trembling slightly as sweat dripped down his temples. He had written to the matrimonial agency 6 months prior during a moment of profound loneliness, never truly believing anyone would answer, let alone agree to travel 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met. The ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of unforgiving Wyoming prairie, where the wind never stopped howling, and the winters could freeze a man solid if he wandered too far from shelter. Harrison had built it from nothing over 12 years, starting when he was barely 19 years old with nothing but a broken wagon, 2 horses, and determination that bordered on foolishness. Now at 31, he had a profitable cattle operation, a sturdy 2-story house with glass windows, and enough money in the bank to support a family comfortably. What he did not have was someone to share it with, someone to break the silence that had grown so heavy in recent years. It felt like a physical presence pressing against his chest. He had been honest in his letters to the agency, perhaps too honest. He had described his appearance plainly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with brown hair that never quite stayed in place, green eyes, a nose broken twice in his youth, and hands permanently stained from ranch work. He had mentioned his temperament, which his ranch hands described as steady and fair but quiet to the point of being unsettling. He had listed his assets and his prospects. What he had not mentioned was the loneliness that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night, making him walk the house like a ghost haunting his own life. The woman who had answered his inquiry was named Margaret Danforth, and her letters had been brief but well written, with elegant handwriting that suggested education and refinement. She had explained that circumstances in Boston had made it necessary for her to seek opportunities elsewhere, but she had provided few details about what those circumstances might be. She had described herself as 24 years old, brown-haired, capable of managing a household and willing to work hard. The photograph she had sent showed a serious-faced young woman with large, dark eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Harrison had found himself studying that photograph more times than he cared to admit, wondering what had driven someone who looked so composed to leave everything familiar behind. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures already climbing toward unbearable by 8 o'clock. Harrison bathed carefully, shaved for the 2nd time that week, and dressed in his best clothes. Black trousers, a white shirt that his housekeeper Mrs. Chen had starched within an inch of its life, a leather vest, and a black hat he rarely wore because it felt too formal. He hitched his 2 best horses to the wagon, the one he used for trips to town rather than ranch work, and set out for Douglas well before necessary, unable to bear waiting at the ranch any longer. The town of Douglas sat along the North Platte River, a growing settlement that had sprung up when the railroad pushed through several years earlier. It boasted 3 saloons, 2 hotels, a bank, several stores, a church, and a school that doubled as a community meeting hall. Harrison knew most of the residents by sight if not by name, and as he drove down the main street toward the train station, he felt their curious gazes following him. News traveled fast in small towns, and his impending marriage had been the subject of considerable speculation and gossip. He arrived at the station a full hour before the train was scheduled, then spent that time pacing the wooden platform until the station master, a grizzled man named Pete Sullivan, finally told him to sit down before he wore a hole straight through the boards. Harrison sat on a bench, but could not remain still, his knee bouncing nervously while his hands gripped his hat so tightly he would later find permanent creases in the brim. The train whistle sounded in the distance at precisely 2 o'clock, a lonesome wail that carried across the prairie. Harrison stood, his heart hammering against his ribs with enough force that he wondered if others could see his chest moving. The locomotive appeared on the horizon like a beast made of iron and steam, growing larger and louder until it pulled into the station with a great screeching of brakes and a cloud of smoke that temporarily obscured everything. Passengers began disembarking. A cattle buyer Harrison recognized from previous trips, 2 women in expensive traveling clothes who looked around Douglas with obvious disdain, a family with 3 small children who immediately began running up and down the platform despite their mother's exhausted protests. Harrison watched each person with mounting anxiety, searching for the woman from the photograph. Then he saw her stepping carefully down from the train car, one hand gripping the rail with white-knuckled intensity, and his breath caught in his throat. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days, and a small hat perched on brown hair that had been pinned up in a style that was probably fashionable in Boston, but looked overly elaborate for Wyoming. She carried a single carpet bag, which seemed impossibly small for someone who had traveled across the country to start a new life. But what captured Harrison's attention immediately was the way she moved. Her left leg did not bend naturally as she descended the steps. The movement was stiff, mechanical, and accompanied by a distinctive hollow sound as wood struck wood. She was wearing a prosthetic leg, clearly visible now in the way her skirt moved, and from the practiced way she navigated the steps. This was not a recent injury. Harrison felt his stomach drop, not from any sense of disappointment, but from sudden understanding. This was why she had been vague in her letters. This was the circumstance that had made it necessary for her to seek opportunities elsewhere. Margaret Danforth reached the platform and stood there for a moment, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with an expression that combined hope and dread in equal measure. When her gaze found Harrison, who was the only man standing alone and staring directly at her, something flickered across her face that might have been resignation. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked toward him with a pronounced limp but undeniable dignity. "Mr. Vance." Her voice was lower than he had expected, with a slight roughness that suggested she had been holding back tears during the journey. "Yes, madam, Miss Danforth," he spoke softly, aware of the people watching them with undisguised curiosity. "I am Margaret Danforth." She paused, her hands tightening around the handle of her carpet bag. "I understand if the arrangement is no longer acceptable to you. I can work to earn money for return passage. I have experience as a seamstress and can keep accounts. I did not mention my condition in my letters because I feared you would not respond, and I needed to leave Boston. That was dishonest of me, and I apologize." She delivered this speech without looking away from him, though Harrison could see the effort it cost her. Her jaw was clenched, and there was a tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with the weight of her bag. She expected rejection. She had probably faced it before, perhaps many times. Harrison stepped forward and gently took the carpet-bag from her hands. "You walk just fine to me, Miss Danforth. The wagon is this way, and it has been a long journey for you. There is cold water in the canteen if you are thirsty." For a moment, Margaret simply stared at him, her eyes widening with something that looked like shock. Then, to Harrison's alarm, tears began sliding down her cheeks, though she made no sound and her expression barely changed. She wiped at them impatiently with her gloved hands. "Forgive me. I did not expect kindness." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then Boston must be a harder place than Wyoming, and that is saying something." Harrison offered his arm, unsure if she would take it or if the gesture would offend her. After a brief hesitation, she placed her hand lightly in the crook of his elbow, and they walked together toward the wagon. The ride back to the ranch took over an hour, and for the first part of the journey, neither of them spoke. Harrison was acutely aware of Margaret sitting beside him on the wagon seat, her posture perfectly straight despite what must have been exhaustion from days of travel. He wanted to say something reassuring, but words had never come easily to him, and everything he thought of sounded foolish in his head. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "How far is your ranch?" "Another 30 minutes or so. It sits in a valley between two ridges. There is a creek that runs year-round, which is why I chose the location. Good water and grass. How many people live there?" "Besides myself, there is Mrs. Chen who manages the house and does the cooking. She is from China originally and came west with her husband during the railroad construction. He died 2 years ago, and she needed work. There are also 4 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Tommy Riggs, who has been with me since the beginning, Jake Martinez and his brother Sam, who are good with horses, and an older man named Ezra who mostly handles the breaking of new animals these days after his back injury. They are decent men, and I will not tolerate any disrespect toward you." Margaret nodded slowly. "And what exactly will be expected of me?" Harrison considered this carefully. "I suppose that depends on what we agree to. I understand this situation is unusual and you have just arrived. I am not expecting anything immediate beyond your presence and perhaps eventually companionship. Mrs. Chen can continue managing the house if you prefer, or you can take over those duties. There is a spare bedroom where you can stay until we both feel comfortable with the marriage proceeding fully." "You would give me a choice." Margaret turned to look at him directly, and he was struck again by the intelligence in her dark eyes. "I am not looking for an unpaid servant, Miss Danforth. I am looking for a wife, a partner. That means your comfort and wishes matter to me." "You are very different from what I expected," she said quietly, then turned her attention back to the landscape rolling past them. "How did you lose your leg?" The question was abrupt, and Harrison saw her wince immediately after asking it. "I am sorry. That was rude. You do not have to answer." "It is a fair question, especially given the circumstances." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, and Harrison was about to tell her she did not need to explain when she spoke again. "I was 8 years old. There was an accident with a streetcar in Boston. My leg was crushed beneath the wheel, and infection set in quickly. The doctors said amputation was necessary to save my life. My father was alive then, and he made sure I had the best prosthetic available, though it has been replaced twice as I grew. That must have been difficult. It shaped my entire life." There was no self-pity in her voice, only a statement of fact. "I could not run and play like other children. As I grew older, I could not attend social functions without being treated as an object of pity or curiosity. Potential suitors would express interest until they learned of my condition, then suddenly remember other obligations. My father died 3 years ago, and my brother inherited everything. He has a wife who finds my presence in their home an embarrassment. She made it clear that I needed to find other arrangements. So you answered a matrimonial advertisement." "So I answered several dozen matrimonial advertisements," Margaret corrected with a bitter edge to her voice. "You are the only one who responded after I decided to be honest about my situation from the beginning. Well, almost honest. I feared that putting it in writing would ensure no response at all, but I planned to tell you the truth when we met. I thought at least then I would have the chance to explain in person before being sent away." Harrison absorbed this information, feeling anger rise in his chest at people he had never met. Their loss is my gain, then, though I am sorry you had to experience such treatment. Margaret turned to stare at him again, and he kept his eyes on the road, suddenly self-conscious. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I know you were brave enough to travel 2,000 miles on the hope that someone might see past what others consider a limitation. I know you were honest when you could have tried to hide the truth until after a wedding, and I know you have survived circumstances that would have broken someone with less strength. He paused, then added quietly, I may not know you yet, Miss Danforth, but I would like to. If you are willing to give this arrangement a chance. When he finally risked a glance at her, Margaret was wiping at her eyes again, but there was something different in her expression now, something that might have been hope. The Double V Ranch came into view as they crested the final ridge, and Harrison felt a swell of pride as he always did when seeing his home. The main house was built of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There was a barn large enough for 20 horses, a bunkhouse for the hands, various outbuildings for equipment and supplies, and corrals where cattle milled about, their red and brown hides vivid against the dusty ground. Beyond it all, the creek sparkled in the afternoon sun, lined with cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. It is beautiful, Margaret said softly, and Harrison felt something warm bloom in his chest at the approval in her voice. Mrs. Chen emerged from the house as Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a practical dress and apron. Her face was weathered from years in the harsh climate, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She took in Margaret's appearance in a single sweeping glance, and Harrison saw something shift in her expression, a softening that few people ever witnessed. "This is Miss Danforth," Harrison said as he helped Margaret down from the wagon, very aware of the way she momentarily leaned on him as her wooden leg made contact with the ground. "Miss Danforth, this is Mrs. Chen, who keeps this ranch running more efficiently than I ever could." "Welcome, Mrs. Chen said simply, then added, "You must be tired. I have prepared the upstairs bedroom on the east side. It has good morning light and a comfortable chair by the window. Come, I will show you." Margaret looked at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead and rest. We typically have supper around 6 o'clock. I will have your bag brought up." He watched as Mrs. Chen led Margaret into the house, noting how the older woman had subtly positioned herself on Margaret's left side, providing an unobtrusive support if needed without making it obvious. Mrs. Chen had lost her own husband to a construction accident and knew something about navigating life after tragedy. Harrison suspected the two women would understand each other well. The ranch hands emerged from various locations as news of Margaret's arrival spread. Tommy Riggs, a lanky man of 28 with perpetually sunburned skin and a quick smile, wandered over from the barn. The Martinez brothers, Jake and Sam, appeared from the direction of the corrals where they had been working with a new horse. Ezra limped out from the bunkhouse, his gray beard neatly trimmed despite the general gruffness of his appearance. "So she actually came?" Tommy asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She did." Harrison kept his tone firm, establishing boundaries without needing to make threats. "Her name is Miss Danforth, and she will be treated with complete respect. Is that understood, of course, boss?" Tommy tipped his hat. "She seems like a lady, pretty too." "She has a prosthetic leg," Harrison said bluntly, wanting to address it immediately rather than let speculation and gossip fester. "Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and move on. This is going to be her home, and I will not have her made uncomfortable." Ezra let out a short laugh. Hell, Harrison, half of us are broken in one way or another. I've got a back that sounds like gravel in a can when I move. Sam has that scar across his face from a knife fight. And Tommy over here has all the sense God gave a turnip. She will fit right in. The tension broke as the other men chuckled, and Harrison felt his shoulders relax slightly. These were good men, and he had known they would not cause problems, but having it settled openly made everything easier. Get back to work, then. The cattle do not care about my personal life, and neither should you. As the hands dispersed, Harrison carried Margaret's carpetbag into the house and up the stairs to the room Mrs. Chen had prepared. He knocked softly on the door, and Margaret's voice called for him to enter. She was standing by the window, looking out at the valley, and she turned as he entered. She had removed her hat and traveling jacket, and her hair was starting to escape from its pins, curling slightly around her face in the humidity. She looked younger without the severe styling, and vulnerable in a way that made Harrison want to promise her that nothing would hurt her here. "Your home is lovely," she said. "Mrs. Chen tells me you built most of it yourself, with help from the hands, but yes. It took 3 years to get it to this state." He set her bag down on the chest at the foot of the bed. "I wanted you to know that I told the men about your leg. I hope that does not offend you, but I thought it better to address it directly rather than have them wondering or whispering." Margaret's expression was unreadable. And what was their reaction? Ezra pointed out that everyone here has their own injuries or difficulties. You will not be treated as different. That is more than I dared hope for. She turned back to the window, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Mr. Vance, I need to be clear about something. I am grateful for your kindness, truly. But I will not be a burden to you. I can work. I may not be able to do everything a fully able-bodied woman can do, but I can contribute. I can sew, cook, keep accounts, tend a garden, preserve food. I am not looking for charity." Harrison moved to stand a few feet away from her, close enough to speak quietly but far enough to give her space. "I do not see you as a burden, Miss Danforth. I see you as someone who has been treated poorly by people who should have known better, and I will not add to that. Take your time to settle in and rest from your journey. We can discuss the details of our arrangement when you are ready. And if I decide I cannot go through with the marriage." The question hung in the air between them. Harrison took a slow breath, considering his answer carefully. "Then I will respect that decision and help you find a suitable situation, whether that means work in town or passage to somewhere else. But I hope you will at least give this a chance. I think we might suit each other well." Margaret turned to face him fully, and there was something searching in her gaze, as if she were trying to see into his soul. "Why me? Surely you could have found a wife locally, someone without complications." "There are not many unmarried women in Douglas, and the few there are have known me since I arrived here with nothing. They see me as the wild boy who nearly starved his first winter, or as a business arrangement. You see me as I am now. And perhaps more importantly, I think you understand what it is like to be lonely." The words came out more raw and honest than he had intended, and he saw Margaret's expression shift, her eyes widening with recognition. "Yes," she said softly. "I understand that very well." They stood there for a long moment, something unspoken but significant passing between them. Then Mrs. Chen's voice called up the stairs that supper would be ready in an hour, breaking the spell. "I will leave you to rest," Harrison said, moving toward the door. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up, and Mrs. Chen can provide anything else you need." "Mr. Vance," Margaret's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Thank you for everything. I know I have already said it, but I mean it sincerely." "You are welcome, Miss Danforth. And please call me Harrison. Mr. Vance makes me sound like my father, and that is not a comparison I enjoy." A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Only if you call me Margaret. Miss Danforth makes me feel like a schoolteacher, which I am decidedly not." Harrison returned her smile and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. As he walked down the stairs, he felt something he had not experienced in a very long time: anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. Supper that evening was held in the large kitchen rather than the formal dining room Harrison rarely used. Mrs. Chen had prepared roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans from the garden. Margaret came downstairs wearing the same dress but with her hair restyled more simply, and Harrison noticed she moved more easily now, as if the rest had restored some of her strength. Mrs. Chen insisted Margaret sit in the chair closest to the window, where the evening breeze provided some relief from the heat still radiating from the stove. Harrison sat across from her, and they ate mostly in comfortable silence, the kind that did not need to be filled with meaningless chatter. "Mrs. Chen," Margaret said after a while, "this is the best chicken I have tasted in years. What is your secret?" The older woman looked pleased despite her gruff response. "No secret, just proper cooking and not burning everything to coal like some people." She shot a meaningful look at Harrison, who had the grace to look sheepish. "I burned one meal," he protested. "One meal every week for 2 months before I arrived," Mrs. Chen corrected. "This man could not cook water without supervision." Margaret laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her entire face, and Harrison found himself smiling in response. "I am a decent cook myself," she offered. "Perhaps I could help in the kitchen. I would enjoy the work." "We will see how you settle in first," Mrs. Chen said, but her tone was warm. "For now, you rest and recover from your journey." After supper, Harrison suggested they sit on the porch where it was cooler. Margaret agreed, and they settled into 2 rocking chairs that Harrison had built during his first winter on the ranch, back when long dark evenings had required projects to maintain sanity. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The cattle had settled for the night, and the only sounds were the gentle lowing of the animals, the chirping of crickets, and the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods by the creek. "I had forgotten how big the sky could be," Margaret said quietly. "In Boston, there are so many buildings that you only ever see a small slice of it. Here, it goes on forever. That is one of the things I love most about this place. No matter what troubles you have, looking at that sky reminds you how small those troubles are in the grand scheme of things." Harrison rocked slowly, letting the peace of the evening settle over him. "Tell me about Boston. What was it like growing up there?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, and he thought perhaps she would decline to answer. Then she began speaking, her voice soft but steady. "My father was a banker, successful but not wealthy. We lived in a comfortable brownstone in a respectable neighborhood. My mother died when I was very young, too young for me to have clear memories of her. After my accident, my father became very protective. He educated me at home with tutors rather than send me to school where I might be teased. I learned to read Latin and French, studied mathematics and literature, learned to play piano, though I was never particularly talented at it." It sounds isolating. It was, though I did not realize it fully until I was older. I had no friends my own age, no understanding of how to navigate social situations. When my father finally did try to introduce me to society, I was 18 and completely unprepared. I said the wrong things, dressed the wrong way, and of course, there was my leg. The other young women treated me with pity, and the young men treated me as if I were invisible, or worse, as if I were some kind of curiosity." She paused, her hands gripping the arms of the rocking chair. "My father meant well, but by sheltering me so completely, he left me unprepared for the reality of the world. And after he died, my brother Alexander inherited everything, as was proper. He is 10 years older than me and had already established his own household with his wife Constance. They allowed me to live with them, but it was made clear I was there on sufferance. Constance found my presence awkward when she entertained. She suggested I might be happier in a home for invalid women, which was just a polite way of suggesting an asylum. Margaret's voice hardened. I knew I needed to find another solution before she convinced Alexander to force the issue. Harrison felt anger rising again at people he would never meet. So you looked for opportunities elsewhere. I did. I had a small inheritance from my mother, enough for train passage and a few months of living expenses if necessary. I answered advertisements for teaching positions, governesses, companions to elderly ladies. All of them found reasons to decline once they learned of my condition. The matrimonial agencies were my last option. She turned to look at him in the fading light. You must understand, Harrison, I am not looking for a love match. I am looking for security, for a place where I can be useful and not be treated as a burden or an embarrassment. If you can offer me that, I will be a loyal and faithful wife. But I do not want to deceive you into thinking I can offer more than that. The honesty of her words struck Harrison deeply. She was offering him a business arrangement, a partnership of convenience and mutual benefit. It was exactly what he thought he wanted when he first wrote to the agency. But sitting here with her now, watching the way the sunset caught in her dark hair and brought out the fine bones of her face, he found himself wanting something more. Not immediately, and perhaps not ever if she could not offer it, but the potential for it. I appreciate your honesty, he said carefully. And I want you to know that I will not pressure you for more than you are comfortable giving. If you want this to be a partnership of mutual support and respect, then that is what it will be. But I also want you to know that I am open to more if feelings develop over time. Not because I expect them to, but because I think it is possible we might grow to care for each other beyond simple arrangement. Margaret studied him for a long moment. You are a surprising man, Harrison Vance. I will take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. She smiled slightly, then stood up carefully. I think I should retire for the evening. The journey has exhausted me more than I realized. Harrison stood as well, the ingrained manners his mother had beaten into him as a boy rising automatically. Of course, sleep as late as you need tomorrow. There is no rush for anything. Margaret nodded and moved toward the door, but paused before entering the house. Harrison, I think I would like to give this arrangement a chance. A real chance, not just going through the motions until something better comes along. You have shown me more genuine kindness in a few hours than I experienced in years in Boston. That means something to me. Before he could respond, she slipped inside, leaving Harrison standing on the porch with a strange warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The next several weeks established a routine that surprised Harrison with how quickly it began to feel natural. Margaret proved to be an early riser despite his insistence that she could sleep late, and she appeared in the kitchen each morning just after dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast. The two women developed an easy working relationship, with Mrs. Chen teaching Margaret about cooking for ranch hands who did hard physical labor and required substantial portions, while Margaret shared recipes from Boston and techniques for making limited ingredients stretch further. Harrison discovered that Margaret had not exaggerated her skills. She could sew with tiny, precise stitches, and she immediately began repairing clothes for the ranch hands who had been making do with torn shirts and pants with missing buttons. She took over the ranch accounts, organizing the chaotic system Harrison had been using into neat ledgers that made it easy to track expenses and profits. She started a vegetable garden near the house, using techniques she had learned from books, and despite the harsh climate, managed to coax impressive growth from tomatoes, squash, and herbs. What surprised Harrison most was how well Margaret adapted to ranch life. She could not ride horses, the prosthetic leg making it impossible to maintain proper balance in the saddle. But she learned to drive the wagon competently, and often accompanied Mrs. Chen into Douglas for supplies. She did not shy away from the harder aspects of ranch life. The butchering of animals, the harsh realities of calving season with its inevitable losses, the constant battle against weather and predators. The ranch hands, initially awkward around her, relaxed as they realized she did not expect special treatment or take offense at rough language or crude jokes. Tommy Riggs began teaching her to shoot, reasoning that everyone on an isolated ranch should know how to handle a gun. Margaret proved to be a decent shot, and Harrison came home one afternoon to find her calmly practicing with his rifle, the wooden leg braced to help absorb the recoil. In the evenings, after supper was finished and the dishes cleaned, Harrison and Margaret fell into the habit of sitting on the porch together. Sometimes they talked about inconsequential things, the weather, the cattle, news from town. Other times, they shared deeper pieces of themselves. Margaret told him about the books she loved, the dreams she had harbored as a girl before the accident changed everything. Harrison told her about building the ranch, about the first terrible winter when he nearly died from pneumonia, and survived only because Tommy found him delirious in the cabin and rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor. "Why did you come west?" Margaret asked one evening about a month after her arrival. "You have never said." Harrison rocked slowly, considering how much to reveal. "My father was a drunk and a violent man. He worked on the railroads back east, and when he was sober, he could be charming. When he was drunk, which was most of the time, he was dangerous. My mother died when I was 15. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I saw the bruises. She fell down the stairs, my father said. Maybe she did, or maybe he pushed her." Margaret reached over and placed her hand on his arm, a gentle touch that anchored him. "I am so sorry. I left the day after we buried her, took what little money I had saved and headed west, as far from him as I could get. I worked on railroad crews, cattle drives, anything that would earn me enough to eat and eventually save for land. When I found this valley, I knew it was where I wanted to build something permanent, something that was mine that no one could take away." "Have you had any contact with your father since? He died 4 years ago. A railroad worker I knew sent word. He fell under a train while drunk." Harrison paused. "I did not feel sad, and I have felt guilty about that. But mostly I just felt relieved that he could not show up here and try to take what I had built. That does not make you a bad person, Harrison. It makes you human." Margaret's hand was still on his arm, warm and solid. "We cannot choose our families, but we can choose how we move forward from them." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think we should proceed with the marriage. The legal marriage, I mean. We have been here long enough together that my presence is probably causing talk in town, and I do not want to damage your reputation." Harrison turned to look at her, searching her face in the dim light from the house windows. "Are you certain? There is no rush, Margaret." "I do not care what people in town think. I am certain. You have been nothing but honorable and kind. I trust you, which is something I did not think I would ever say to a man again. And beyond the practical considerations, I find that I enjoy your company. I think we could build a good life together." "I enjoy your company too," Harrison said, his heart beating faster. "More than I expected to, if I am being honest. When I wrote to the agency, I thought I was looking for someone to fill the silence, but you have become more than that. You have become someone I look forward to seeing at the start of each day and someone whose opinion matters to me." Margaret smiled, and in that moment, she looked genuinely happy. "Then let us make it official. We can speak to the minister in Douglas this week." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Douglas, with Mrs. Chen and Tommy Riggs serving as witnesses. Margaret wore a simple dress of deep green that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Harrison wore his best suit. The ceremony was brief, conducted by Reverend Thomas, an elderly man who had seen countless weddings and seemed pleased to add another to his count. Afterward, they returned to the ranch for a meal Mrs. Chen had prepared with unusual care. Roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from Margaret's garden, and a pie made from dried apples. The ranch hands joined them, and the evening took on a festive air, with Sam Martinez pulling out a fiddle Harrison had never known he owned and playing lively tunes that had Mrs. Chen tapping her foot despite her usual stern demeanor. When the celebration wound down and the others retreated to give them privacy, Harrison and Margaret stood together on the porch under a sky full of stars. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the day's heat, and carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. "Are you nervous?" Harrison asked quietly. Margaret considered the question. "A little. Are you?" "Yes." He took her hand, feeling the calluses that had formed over the past weeks from garden work and other labor. "Margaret, I want you to know that nothing has to change tonight unless you want it to. We can continue as we have been until you feel comfortable with more." She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes searching his face. "I think I would like things to change, at least somewhat. I have been alone for so long, Harrison. Alone in a house full of people, alone in my own head. With you, I do not feel alone. That is precious to me." Harrison lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. Then he lowered his head and kissed her, soft and careful, a question rather than a demand. Margaret responded by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with an intensity that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, she was smiling. "I think we should go inside," she said softly. "Husband." "I think you are right," Harrison replied. "Wife." They moved together into the house and up the stairs to the room that had been Harrison's alone but would now be theirs to share. What passed between them that night was tender and careful, two people learning each other with patience and growing affection. If it was not the passionate romance of novels, it was something perhaps more valuable, the beginning of genuine intimacy built on respect and trust. As fall arrived and the weather began to cool, Margaret fully claimed her place on the ranch. She was no longer the mail-order bride who had arrived with uncertainty and fear, but rather the lady of the house who managed affairs with quiet competence. The ranch hand sought her opinion on various matters, from the best way to remove a stain from leather to whether a particular cow looked ill. Mrs. Chen began teaching her the preservation techniques necessary to survive the brutal Wyoming winters, and together they put up vegetables, fruits, and meats that would feed everyone through the long months ahead. Harrison found himself falling in love with his wife in gradual increments. It was not a sudden revelation, but rather a slow accumulation of moments. Margaret laughing at one of Tommy's terrible jokes, her hair escaping from its pins while she worked in the garden, the way she read aloud in the evenings from whatever book had caught her interest, sharing the words like gifts. The way she looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention, with something warm and wondering in her eyes. One evening in October, when the cottonwoods along the creek had turned brilliant gold and the air carried the bite of approaching winter, they sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. Margaret suddenly said, "I am happy here, Harrison, truly happy. I wanted you to know that." Harrison pulled her closer against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "I am happy too, happier than I have ever been or thought I could be, even though your wife is damaged goods." There was no bitterness in the question, only curiosity. "You are not damaged, Margaret. You are brave and strong and more capable than most people with two working legs. Your prosthetic is just a part of who you are, like my broken nose or the scar on my shoulder from a cattle horn. It does not define you, and it certainly does not diminish you." Margaret was quiet for a moment, then said, "I love you, Harrison Vance. I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone, but they are true." Harrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I love you too, Margaret, more than I have the words to express properly. You have made this house into a home, and made my life into something worth living beyond just surviving." They kissed then, long and deep, and later moved inside to demonstrate their love in more physical ways, their comfort with each other having grown into something passionate and satisfying for them both. Winter arrived with typical Wyoming brutality, bringing temperatures that dropped far below zero and snowstorms that could last for days. The ranch became an isolated world, cut off from town except for the most necessary trips. But inside the house, there was warmth and comfort. Harrison and Margaret spent long evenings by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing together in peaceful silence. Margaret proved her value during the harsh season in countless ways. She nursed Tommy through a bout of influenza that could have killed him, sitting up for 2 straight nights to keep his fever down. She helped deliver a calf during a blizzard when the mother was having trouble, her steady hands and calm voice helping to guide the process. She kept the household accounts balanced and ensured that supplies were rationed carefully to last until spring. In February, during a brief warm spell that melted some of the snow, Margaret told Harrison that she was pregnant. He had been repairing a fence near the house, and she brought him coffee, then delivered the news with characteristic directness. "I am with child. Mrs. Chen confirmed what I suspected this morning." Harrison dropped the hammer he had been holding and stared at her with an expression of such joy that Margaret laughed. "You are certain, as we can be at this stage. The baby should arrive in late summer if all goes well." He swept her into his arms, mindful of her balance, and spun her around once before setting her down carefully. "This is wonderful news, the best news. Are you feeling well? Do you need to rest? Should you be out in the cold? Harrison, I am pregnant, not dying." But she was smiling, clearly pleased by his reaction. "I feel fine, a bit tired perhaps, and my stomach is unreliable in the mornings, but nothing I cannot manage. Still, you should not overdo things. I will speak to Mrs. Chen about making sure you do not work too hard." "You will do no such thing. I am perfectly capable of managing my own activities." Margaret poked him in the chest with one finger. "I am not made of glass, husband. This baby will be born healthy and strong, and until then, I will continue doing what I have been doing." Harrison knew better than to argue with her when she used that tone. So he simply kissed her and declared that he was the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. As Margaret's pregnancy progressed, Harrison found himself watching her constantly, amazed by the changes in her body and terrified of all the things that could go wrong. Mrs. Chen finally took him aside one day in April and told him bluntly that he needed to stop hovering. "Your wife is a strong woman," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "She survived Boston, survived journey here, survived Wyoming winter. She will survive childbirth too. Your worry does not help. It makes her feel like you think she is weak." "I do not think she is weak," Harrison protested. "I just worry about complications because of her leg. Her leg is not having baby. The rest of her is perfectly healthy." Mrs. Chen softened slightly. "I know you worry because you love her, but trust her to know what she can handle. She has lived with that leg for 16 years. She knows her own limits better than you do." Harrison took the advice to heart and tried to moderate his concerns, though it was difficult. He was 47 weeks of quiet anxiety until one hot August morning when Margaret's labor began. The birth was long and difficult, as first births often were. Margaret labored through most of the day and into the evening, with Mrs. Chen and the doctor from Douglas attending her. Harrison paced outside the bedroom, listening to sounds that made his blood run cold and wishing desperately that he could do something, anything, to help. Finally, as the sun was setting in another spectacular display of color, he heard a baby's cry. Moments later, Mrs. Chen emerged, looking tired but pleased. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with good lungs, and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but well." Harrison rushed into the room to find Margaret propped up against pillows, her hair soaked with sweat and her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a small bundle, and as Harrison approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Meet your son," Margaret said softly. "I thought we could name him Henry after your mother's father you told me about." Harrison sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to tear his eyes away from the baby. "Henry Vance. That sounds right." He looked up at Margaret, his eyes bright with tears. "You are amazing. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Margaret replied, then added with a tired smile, "though I did the harder part today." "You absolutely did." Harrison kissed her forehead gently. "Rest now. I will sit with Henry so you can sleep." "You do not have to do that. Mrs. Chen can take him." "I want to. Please, let me do this." Margaret handed over the baby carefully, and Harrison cradled his son with the kind of intense concentration he usually reserved for handling explosives. The baby was so small, so fragile, yet Mrs. Chen had said he was healthy. He had Harrison's green eyes and Margaret's serious expression, already looking around with apparent fascination at this strange new world. As Margaret drifted off to sleep, Harrison sat in the chair by the window, holding his son and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He thought about his own father, that violent, bitter man, and made a silent promise to the tiny person in his arms that he would be different. He would be patient and kind and present. He would make sure Henry grew up knowing he was loved and valued, that his home was a place of safety rather than fear. The baby yawned, a surprisingly large gesture for such a small person, and Harrison felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. He had thought he understood love when he married Margaret, but this was something different, something primal and overwhelming. This was his child, a completely helpless being who depended on him and Margaret for everything. The responsibility was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Mrs. Chen entered quietly, carrying a tray with food for Margaret when she woke. She looked at Harrison holding the baby and smiled, one of her rare, genuine smiles that transformed her usually stern face. "You are good man, Harrison Vance. You will be good father." "I hope so," Harrison said softly. "I have no idea what I am doing. No new parent does. You learn as you go. And you have strong partner in Margaret. You will figure it out together." She was right, of course. Over the following weeks, Harrison and Margaret stumbled through the challenges of new parenthood together. Henry was a good baby overall, but he had his difficult moments, nights when he would not settle, days when he seemed to cry for no discernible reason. Margaret nursed him with determined patience despite the exhaustion, and Harrison walked the floor with his son at 3 in the morning, singing old songs he half remembered from his own childhood before everything had gone wrong. Margaret adapted to motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else. She managed to care for Henry while still overseeing household affairs, though she accepted help more readily now, allowing Mrs. Chen to take over some tasks. Her recovery from the birth was complicated slightly by her prosthetic, which sometimes threw off her balance when she was tired, but she managed through sheer stubbornness and determination. As autumn arrived again, bringing cooler weather, Henry began to develop his own personality. He was a serious baby, watching everything with intense concentration, but when he smiled, it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He loved being outside, calming immediately when taken out to the porch or the yard, his small head swiveling to track birds and clouds and the movement of horses in the corrals. One September afternoon, Harrison came back from working cattle to find Margaret sitting under the cottonwood by the creek, Henry lying on a blanket beside her, both of them dappled with sunlight filtering through the golden leaves. Margaret was reading aloud from a book, and though Henry was far too young to understand the words, he seemed content to listen to his mother's voice. Harrison stood watching them for a long moment, this picture of peace and contentment, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost brought him to his knees. A year ago, he had been alone, going through the motions of life without really living it. Now he had a wife he loved deeply, a healthy son, and a future that stretched out before him bright with possibility. Margaret looked up and saw him, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Come join us. I was just reading Henry some poetry. I am certain he finds it very educational." Harrison sat down on the blanket, Henry immediately reaching for him with tiny, grasping hands. He picked up his son, marveling as he always did at how much bigger Henry seemed every day. "What are you reading, Walt Whitman? Leaves of Grass. I thought Henry should have some culture." Margaret leaned against Harrison's shoulder. "How was your day?" "Long but productive. We moved the herd to the south pasture for the fall. Jake thinks we should have a good hay crop this year, enough to see us well through winter." He paused, then added, "I was thinking we should expand the house. Add another bedroom, maybe enlarge the kitchen. With Henry getting bigger and possibly more children in the future, we will need more space." Margaret tilted her head to look up at him. "Are you planning on a large family, Mr. Vance? If you are willing, Mrs. Vance." "I find I quite enjoy being a father, and I very much enjoy the process of creating children with you." Margaret laughed, the sound rich and unrestrained. "You are incorrigible. But yes, I would like more children if we are blessed with them. Perhaps we should wait until Henry is a bit older, though. I am still recovering from the first one. Of course. No rush." Harrison kissed the top of her head. "I just want you to know that I think about the future now, about all the possibilities. I used to only think about surviving to the next season, making it through another winter. Now I think about watching Henry grow up, about teaching him to ride and work cattle, about growing old with you. Those thoughts make me happy, Margaret. You and Henry have given me that." Margaret's eyes were bright with emotion. "You have given me just as much. A home, a family, a place where I belong, where I am valued for who I am rather than pitied for what I lack." She placed her hand on his cheek, her thumb brushing along his jaw. "I love you, Harrison, more each day. And I love you." He kissed her properly, Henry squirming between them in protest at being squished. They broke apart laughing, and Henry, apparently deciding this was a wonderful game, let out a shriek of delight. Winter came again, then spring, then summer. Henry grew from an infant into a toddler, walking early despite Harrison's worry that Margaret's own challenges might somehow be inherited. He was a sturdy child with an independent streak that both amused and frustrated his parents. He loved the ranch animals, showing no fear of the horses and cattle, much to Tommy's delight and Harrison's alarm. On Henry's second birthday, Margaret told Harrison she was pregnant again. This time, he was calmer, having been through the process once already, though still attentive to her needs and comfort. The second pregnancy progressed more easily than the first, perhaps because Margaret knew what to expect and was not dealing with the stress of being new to the ranch and the relationship. In March of 1885, Margaret gave birth to a daughter they named Helen. She was smaller than Henry had been, with wisps of brown hair and blue eyes that would later change to brown like her mother's. Where Henry had been serious and watchful, Helen was sunny and sociable from the start, smiling at anyone who came near her. The house Harrison built had never been so full of life and noise and love. Henry was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes, though his help was more hindrance than assistance. Margaret managed both children with patient efficiency, though Harrison made sure she had plenty of support, hiring a young woman from town named Sarah to help with household tasks several days a week. The years rolled forward in the way they do when life is full and good. Henry started his education with Margaret as his teacher, proving to be bright and curious, always asking questions about everything he saw. Helen followed her brother everywhere, determined to keep up despite being younger and smaller. The ranch prospered, with Harrison's cattle fetching good prices and his reputation for fair dealing bringing business from across the territory. In 1889, when Henry was 6 and Helen was 4, Wyoming became a state rather than a territory. The celebration in Douglas lasted 3 days, with speeches and fireworks and dancing in the streets. The Vance family attended together, Margaret now so much a part of the community that few people even remembered she had not always been there. That night, sitting on their porch under the stars as they had done countless times over the years, Margaret reflected on how much had changed since that day she stepped off the train, terrified and alone. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked Harrison. "If you had turned me away at the station." Harrison considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, usually when I am trying to fall asleep and my mind wanders, but I cannot really imagine it, to be honest. My life before you seems like something that happened to a different person." "I feel the same way. Boston, my brother's house, that lonely, frightened woman I was, it all seems like a story I read rather than something I lived." Margaret took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "You saved my life, Harrison. Not in a dramatic, immediate way, but in the way that mattered most. You gave me a reason to keep living, to believe I had value." "You always had value, Margaret. I just helped you see it." Harrison squeezed her hand gently. "But you saved me too. I was existing but not really living, going through motions without purpose beyond simple survival. You gave me purpose, family, love. You taught me that the walls I had built around myself were not protection but prison." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. From inside the house came a thump and giggle, suggesting Henry and Helen were not as asleep as they were supposed to be, but neither parent moved to investigate. "Some things could be overlooked on special occasions. I want them to know they are loved," Margaret said suddenly. "Henry and Helen. I want them to grow up secure in that knowledge, never doubting it. I do not want them to experience what either of us experienced." "They will know," Harrison assured her. "We tell them every day, and more importantly, we show them through our actions. They will grow up understanding what a loving home looks like, and hopefully they will create the same for their own children someday. I hope so. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. I hope we are giving them everything they need to be happy, whole people. We are doing our best. That is all anyone can do. As the children grew older, the dynamics of the family shifted and evolved. Henry took to ranch work like he was born to it, trailing after his father and the ranch hands, absorbing knowledge about cattle and horses and land management. He was 8 when Harrison first put him on a horse by himself, and the pride on the boy's face was something Harrison would remember for the rest of his life. Helen was different from her brother in many ways. Where Henry was physical and outdoors focused, Helen loved books and learning. She spent hours with Margaret, reading everything she could get her hands on. But she also had a fierce determination that showed itself when she decided she wanted to learn to shoot as well as Henry could. She practiced religiously until she was the better shot of the 2 siblings, something she never let Henry forget. In 1892, Tommy Riggs married a widow from town named Charlotte who had 2 children from her first marriage. The wedding was held at the ranch, and Margaret organized the celebration with the same efficiency she brought to everything. It was the first of several marriages among the ranch hands over the years, and Harrison took pride in knowing his ranch was the kind of place where men could build lives and families rather than just working until they were broken and used up. The same year, Mrs. Chen quietly announced she was retiring. She was now in her 60s and wanted to spend her remaining years with her daughter in California. Margaret threw her a farewell party that brought together everyone from the ranch and half the town of Douglas. Mrs. Chen, never comfortable with attention, tolerated the fuss with gruff grace, but Harrison saw tears in her eyes when she said her private goodbyes to the family. "You take care of each other," she told Harrison and Margaret sternly, "and raise those children well. They are good children. We will. And they are good because they had you in their lives, teaching them and caring for them." Margaret embraced the older woman tightly. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Chen, for welcoming me when I arrived, for your friendship and wisdom. I could not have managed without you." "You could have managed fine. You are a strong woman, but I am glad I was here." Mrs. Chen turned to Harrison. "You did good choosing her, better than you deserved, probably." Harrison laughed. "Absolutely better than I deserved. I got lucky." After Mrs. Chen left, Margaret took over all household management, with Helen eagerly helping despite her young age. Sarah, who had been working part-time, agreed to come full-time, and between the 3 of them, the house ran smoothly. The years continued their steady march forward. Henry grew into a tall, strong young man who shared his father's quiet competence and his mother's intelligence. He was 17 when he started courting Emma Sullivan, the daughter of the town's mayor, a pretty girl with red hair and a quick laugh. Harrison and Margaret watched their son fall in love with a mixture of pride and melancholy, knowing it meant his childhood was truly ending. Helen was 15 and showing signs of becoming a formidable woman. She had inherited her mother's serious nature and determination, but also her father's practicality. She announced at dinner one night that she wanted to attend the new university that had opened in Laramie, studying literature and maybe becoming a teacher. A university. Harrison was caught off guard. The idea of his daughter leaving the ranch for education had not occurred to him. "Yes, I have been reading about it, and they accept female students. I want to learn more than I can here, as much as I love home." Helen looked between her parents anxiously. "Is that foolish?" "It is not foolish at all," Margaret said firmly, shooting a quelling look at Harrison. "It is ambitious and admirable. We will find a way to make it happen." Harrison swallowed his instinctive protest. His daughter was growing up, becoming her own person with her own dreams. He could either support that or damage their relationship by trying to keep her small and close. The choice was not really a choice at all. Your mother is right. If that is what you want, we will make it happen. I am proud of you, Helen, for knowing what you want and being brave enough to pursue it. Helen's face lit up with joy, and she jumped up to hug both her parents. Thank you both. I promise I will make you proud. You already have, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. Every single day. In 1897, Henry married Emma in a ceremony at the Douglas Church, the same church where Harrison and Margaret had wed 15 years earlier. Reverend Thomas had retired, and a younger minister named Davis performed the ceremony, but the essential joy was the same. Henry and Emma settled in a house on the eastern edge of the ranch property, and Henry became a full partner in the ranch operations, his opinions valued equally with Harrison's. Helen left for Laramie that fall, and the house felt emptier without her energetic presence. But she wrote long letters every week, sharing her experiences and discoveries, and came home for holidays and summers. She thrived at the university, making friends and excelling in her studies. In 1899, Henry and Emma had their first child, a girl they named Margaret after her grandmother. Harrison held his granddaughter and felt the same overwhelming rush of love he had experienced with his own children, mixed now with the perspective of age and the bittersweetness of knowing how quickly time passed. Margaret wept when she first saw her namesake, tears of joy and wonder that this beautiful new person carried her name forward. "She is perfect," she whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." As the new century dawned in 1900, the Vance family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Henry and Emma were there with little Margaret, now a year old and starting to walk. Helen was home from university, having just completed her studies and accepted a teaching position in Douglas. Sarah and her husband, one of the newer ranch hands, joined them, along with Tommy and Charlotte and their blended family, and several other long-time employees. Harrison stood on the porch, watching the gathering with contentment settling deep in his bones. 48 years old now, his hair graying at the temples and his hands showing the wear of decades of hard work, but feeling more vital and alive than he had at 20. Margaret stood beside him, still beautiful despite the touches of gray in her own hair, and the lines around her eyes that came from years of squinting at the Wyoming sun. Her wooden leg was now on its third replacement, but she moved with such practiced ease that visiting strangers often did not notice it at all. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked, slipping her hand into his. "About that day at the train station. About seeing you for the first time and thinking how brave you were, coming all this way." Harrison turned to look at her directly. "About how I said you walked just fine to me and meaning it, but not knowing then just how true those words were. You have walked through everything life has thrown at us with grace and strength. You are the finest person I have ever known, Margaret Vance." "You are going to make me cry, and I just got my face settled," Margaret said, but her eyes were already bright with tears. "I was thinking about that day too, about how terrified I was, expecting rejection and finding acceptance instead, finding love though I did not recognize it immediately, finding home." "This is home," Harrison agreed. "Not the house or the land, though those matter, but the people. The family we have built together. That is what makes it home." They kissed, a gentle kiss between two people who had shared nearly 20 years of life together, who had weathered hardships and celebrated joys, who had raised children and built a legacy. When they pulled apart, they saw Helen watching them with a soft smile. "You two are disgustingly romantic," she teased, but her tone was fond. "Just wait until you fall in love," Margaret replied. "Then you will understand." "Maybe I already do," Helen said mysteriously, then laughed at her parents' expressions. "Do not worry, I am not announcing an engagement, but there is a professor at the university who has been very kind and we have corresponded over the summer. We shall see what develops." Harrison groaned dramatically. "My little girl and a university professor. I suppose I should be grateful he is educated." "Harrison," Margaret elbowed him lightly. "Helen is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. And if she chooses to pursue a relationship with a professor or anyone else, we will support her." "Of course we will," Harrison agreed quickly. "I am just practicing being an overprotective father. I thought I had more time before I needed this skill again." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the yard where the party continued. Little Margaret tottered over, her small hands reaching up for her grandfather, and Harrison scooped her up, settling her on his hip with practiced ease. "And what do you think, little one? Should your Aunt Helen marry a professor?" The baby babbled something incomprehensible and grabbed Harrison's nose, making everyone laugh again. As the evening progressed, and the sun set in its nightly display of color, the family gathered around a bonfire Tommy had built. Someone brought out a fiddle, and there was music and dancing and stories told and retold. Harrison held Margaret close as they swayed to a slow song, neither of them particularly graceful dancers, but comfortable enough with each other that it did not matter. "Happy?" Margaret asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Harrison replied honestly. "You have given me everything that matters, Margaret. Family, love, purpose, home. I spent the first 19 years of my life believing I was not worthy of good things, that I was destined to repeat my father's mistakes. You taught me differently. You taught me that we can choose who we become, that our past does not have to define our future." "You taught me those same lessons," Margaret said. "I spent years believing my worth was diminished by my leg, that I would always be lesser, always be pitied or dismissed. You saw me as whole from the first moment, and that changed everything. You gave me back my sense of self-worth, my belief that I deserved love and happiness." They stood together, swaying to the music, surrounded by family and friends, under the vast Wyoming sky they both loved. It was not a perfect life. No life ever was, but it was a good life. A life built on mutual respect and growing love, on shared struggles and celebrated triumphs. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle prices that fluctuated unpredictably, illnesses and injuries, and all the normal difficulties of life on a working ranch. In 1902, Helen married her professor, a man named Robert Sterling, who turned out to be kind and intelligent and utterly devoted to his wife. They settled in Laramie, where Helen taught at the local school, and Robert continued his academic work. In 1905, Emma gave Henry and Harrison another grandson, a boy they named Thomas after Tommy Riggs, who had passed away the previous winter, his body finally giving out after decades of hard living. The loss hit Harrison hard. Tommy had been his first employee, his friend through countless difficulties, and saying goodbye was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Margaret held him as he wept after the funeral, her steady presence anchoring him through his grief. "He knew you cared about him," she said softly. "He told me once that you saved his life by giving him a place to belong, a purpose. He died happy, Harrison. Not everyone can say that." Helen had 2 children with Robert, both daughters who visited the ranch during summers, and fell in love with the wide open spaces their grandfather had built his life around. Henry and Emma added 3 more children to their family over the years, filling the ranch with laughter and noise, and the chaos of young life. In 1910, Harrison and Margaret celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across Wyoming. Harrison was 58 now, Margaret 52, both of them showing the marks of time and hard living, but still strong and active. Harrison still rode out with the cattle most days, though he let Henry handle more of the physical work. Margaret still managed the household accounts and kept everyone organized, though she had turned over most of the cooking to younger hands. They stood together on their porch that night after everyone had gone home or to bed, looking out at the ranch that had grown and evolved over the decades. The original house had been expanded twice, with additional bedrooms and a larger kitchen and a proper parlor for entertaining. The bunkhouse had been rebuilt and enlarged. There were new barns and corrals, and the cattle herd was now 3 times the size it had been when they married. "We have built something lasting," Margaret said quietly. "Something that will continue after we are gone. The children and grandchildren will carry it forward." "That is more than I ever dreamed of when I came west," Harrison replied. "I thought I would live alone, die alone, be forgotten as soon as I was buried. Instead, I have this, all of this." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them. "I have you and our children and grandchildren. I have a legacy that is not measured in money or land, but in the people we raised and the love we shared." "That is the best kind of legacy," Margaret agreed. She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered cheek. "I love you, Harrison Vance. I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember a time when I did not. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Harrison kissed her tenderly. "My mail-order bride who arrived with a wooden leg and walked straight into my heart." Margaret laughed, the sound warm and rich. "That is terrible. Romantic but terrible. I never claimed to be good with words." "No, but you are good with actions. You show your love every day in 1,000 small ways. That matters more than pretty words." They went inside together, climbing the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for nearly 3 decades, where they would lie together in comfortable intimacy, talking quietly until sleep claimed them. It was a scene that would repeat itself countless more times over the years to come, a ritual of connection and affection that anchored their marriage. The years continued their relentless march. More grandchildren arrived, each one celebrated and cherished. Helen's daughters and Henry's children grew up, some staying close to home and others venturing out to make their own ways in a changing world. The automobile arrived in Douglas, a noisy, smelly contraption that Harrison viewed with deep suspicion, but that the younger generation embraced enthusiastically. In 1918, the Great War in Europe ended, and several young men from Douglas who had gone to fight returned home changed by what they had experienced. The ranch provided work for a few of them, young men looking for peace and purpose after witnessing horrors no one should have to see. Harrison and Margaret welcomed them, understanding what it meant to need a fresh start. Harrison was 66 when his heart started giving him trouble, announced by a tightness in his chest that the doctor said was angina. He was told to slow down, to let others handle the physical labor, to rest more. Harrison hated every minute of it, chafing at the restrictions, but Margaret was firm. "I did not keep you alive this long just to let you kill yourself through stubbornness," she told him tartly. "You will follow the doctor's orders, or I will make your life very unpleasant. More unpleasant than being forced to sit on the porch while others do the work," Harrison grumbled. "Much more unpleasant. I can be very creative when properly motivated." Despite his complaints, Harrison followed orders, recognizing that Margaret's concern came from love and fear of losing him. He transitioned fully into an advisory role, offering guidance and experience while letting Henry and the younger men handle the physical demands of ranch work. He spent more time with his grandchildren, telling them stories about the early days of the ranch and teaching them the skills he had acquired over a lifetime. Margaret herself began experiencing problems with her remaining leg, arthritis settling into her joints and making movement increasingly painful. The wooden prosthetic, which she had managed so well for over 4 decades, became more difficult to use as her balance and strength declined. She started using a cane for extra support, then later a wheelchair for longer distances, though she stubbornly walked short distances unaided when she thought no one was watching. They grew old together, these two people who had found each other through a matrimonial advertisement and built a lifetime of love. They watched the world change around them. Automobiles became common, electricity came to the ranch, telephones connected them to distant family members, airplanes flew overhead carrying mail and passengers. The wild Wyoming they had known was slowly being tamed, though it remained harsh and beautiful. In 1925, they celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary with their family gathered around them. 8 grandchildren, ranging from little Margaret, who was now 26 and married with children of her own, to the youngest at just 3 years old. Helen and Robert came from Laramie. Henry and Emma were already on the ranch with their brood. The house was full of noise and laughter and life. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed or home, Harrison and Margaret sat together in their bedroom, the window open to let in the cool night air. Margaret's wooden leg rested against the wall, removed for the night, and Harrison helped her into bed with the careful tenderness of long practice. "Tired?" he asked, settling beside her. "Exhausted," Margaret admitted. "But happy, so very happy. Did you see how beautiful the grandchildren are? And smart. They are all so smart and capable. They take after their grandmother. Some of them clearly take after their grandfather, particularly young Thomas with his stubbornness." Margaret smiled, then grew more serious. "Harrison, I want you to know something, in case I do not get another chance to say it properly. These past 43 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You took a frightened, damaged woman and helped her become whole again. You gave me love and family and purpose. Whatever happens, however much time we have left, know that I am grateful for every moment." Harrison felt his eyes burning with tears. They were 73 and 77 now, and while both were still reasonably healthy, they understood that time was running short. "I am the one who should be grateful. You brought light and love into a life that had been dark and lonely. You taught me what it meant to be truly happy. I love you, Margaret. I will love you until my last breath and beyond if such things are possible." They held each other close, two elderly people who had weathered decades together, who knew each other's bodies and minds as well as they knew their own. They made love carefully that night, a gentle joining that was more about connection than passion, though passion was still present in its way. Afterward they lay entwined, Margaret's head on Harrison's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them drifting toward sleep. "Promise me something," Margaret murmured drowsily. "Anything. If I go first, do not spend the rest of your time grieving. Live fully until the end. The grandchildren will need you, and if I go first, then I will do the same. We have had a good life, Harrison, a wonderful life. We should both promise not to waste whatever time remains." "I promise," Harrison said softly. "Now sleep, my love. Tomorrow will bring what it brings." They lived 6 more years together, 6 years of steady decline but also continued joy. They celebrated each grandchild's milestone, each birth and wedding and achievement. They sat on their porch on warm evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they loved. They laughed and occasionally argued, and remained devoted to each other until the very end. Harrison passed away in his sleep on a cold February night in 1931, his heart simply stopping after 79 years of life. Margaret woke to find him gone, and though she had known this day would come eventually, the reality of his absence was devastating. She wept as she held his cooling body, grieving for the man who had been her partner, her love, her best friend for 48 years. The funeral was held at the Douglas Church, now led by a third minister since Harrison and Margaret's wedding day, and it seemed like half of Wyoming attended. Harrison Vance had been respected and liked, known for his fairness and integrity, and people came from across the state to pay their respects. He was buried on a hill on the ranch property under a cottonwood tree with a simple stone that read, Harrison Vance, 1852–1931. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built a legacy of love. Margaret lived for 2 more years after Harrison's death, remaining mentally sharp and engaged with her family despite her physical limitations. She spent her time writing down stories of the early days on the ranch, wanting to preserve those memories for future generations. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the young man who had met her at the train station and said she walked just fine, about building a life together in the unforgiving Wyoming wilderness, about love that grew from respect and partnership into something deep and lasting. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm July night in 1933, 77 years old and ready to be reunited with Harrison. Her family buried her beside her husband, under the same cottonwood with a matching stone. Margaret Danforth Vance, 1858–1933. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She walked through life with grace and courage. The Double V Ranch continued under Henry's management, then later under his children and grandchildren, remaining in the Vance family for generations to come. The story of Harrison and Margaret became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived with a wooden leg and the rancher who saw past it to the remarkable woman beneath. The story of 2 lonely people who found each other and built a legacy of love that lasted long after they were gone. In the 21st century, Vance descendants still worked the land, still told the story of their ancestors, still felt the presence of Harrison and Margaret in the house they built and the values they instilled. The original house stood as a museum of sorts, preserved carefully, with photographs and documents and Margaret's carefully written memoirs displayed for visitors. And on warm summer evenings, when the wind blew just right through the cottonwoods, it was easy to imagine 2 figures sitting on the old porch, hands clasped together, watching the sun set over the land they loved. A love story that had started with a desperate leap of faith and a moment of unexpected kindness, growing into something that transcended time and circumstance, proving that the truest love stories are built not on perfection but on acceptance, respect, and the choice to see each other truly and completely. The end.